Hello and welcome to the Browns Blitz. Today is Tuesday, March 16th. I'm your host, Rod Bloom. Joining me today is my brother, Jeff. How are things going for you, Jeff?
They're going great, Rod. I finally was able to get my chip implanted today.
I know you're joking, but I mean, it's great news, getting the first dose of the vaccine.
One step closer to being able to go to a football game.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I got mine on last Wednesday or Thursday. So yeah, definitely a good feeling. We are joined by our friend Peter Jones, who has also received a dose. Peter, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Rod. Yeah, very good. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Peter. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, you too. Yeah, I got mine on Sunday, Rod, and my wife got hers on Friday just gone. So, yeah, like you guys say, it's a step in the right direction, a step to being able to go and see live football.
Yeah, definitely a good feeling, guys. Good to talk to you guys. We're not going to mess around because we got a lot of football to talk about. I'm going to skip the drink part again, kind of fading away from that a little bit. I'm drinking a beer, but nothing special. We got free agency news. We got free agency going on. Everybody's just been refreshing on their phones for the last 2 days. Just probably their thumbs are worn out, just waiting for news to happen. The Browns struck with John Johnson, and a move that has everybody excited, signing him to a 3-year, almost $34 million deal with $24 million guaranteed. I think that's one of the moves everybody wanted to see. Everybody wanted to see a defensive end. The Browns signed Takk McKinley to a deal that's, depending on what you look at, it's worth somewhere between $4 and $6 million, I think, on a 1-year deal. Different opinions on Takk McKinley. Not a lot of them are real great, but hopefully he can come in and get a new attitude in Cleveland and maybe become a player that people think that he can be. He obviously had some promise coming out of school, or he wouldn't be in the NFL at this point. So I just kind of want to talk about those two guys briefly. So Jeff, your thoughts on those two signings, and what did you expect the Browns to do at this point in free agency, and how's what they've done compare to what's actually happened?
Well, I was a little bit caught off guard, to be honest, that they went safety with, the big signing. I expected one big signing, possibly two, but I really thought it would come at edge, just because that's where the money's been committed in the past, primarily. But I think, there's definitely a need at safety, and I don't know if it's as great as the need at edge, but, I like the signing. I mean, I think I mentioned to you that if, you want to have a defense like the Rams, the quickest way to do that is to go take their players. So, yeah. From everything I've read on him, I think he's a versatile guy who should be an anchor back there for us for the next 3 years at least. So, hey, that's great. One problem solved in the secondary. Still a lot of questions back there. The Takk McKinley signing. I don't know. I think he's a secondary piece. I don't see him, stepping into the Vernon role. I don't really think that's why he was brought here. And I don't think it solves the question of who's going to be our starting left edge. But we'll talk some more about that as we get through the night here.
Yeah. So Peter, what do you think the Browns? What do you think the Browns can expect out of John Johnson and Takk McKinley?
Well, I think Johnson's an excellent signing. When you think that you've got Ronnie Harrison already, hopefully, Grant Delpit comes back from his injury, and all of a sudden, I think with Delpit, it would be like getting a new player as well. So all of a sudden, you've got three really good players potentially at the safety position, And Johnson, as Jeff said, Johnson's really, really versatile guy. I mean, I think he's better playing deep rather than closer to the line of scrimmage. But he's an excellent cover guy, can tackle, will get up and play the run. I think he's just an excellent pickup, and I think he's a guy that still hasn't reached his peak. He's 4 years into his pro career, missed some time in 2019. So I think this is a guy that's still on the rise as well. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's always difficult, isn't it, in free agency? You never quite know how these guys are going to work out. But I think when you get a guy that's on the rise, a guy that appears to be a high character team leader type of guy, then I think it looks like a really good pickup, and I think he'll do a really good job for the Browns there. The Takk McKinley pickup, I think there's going to be lots of guys at that kind of 4 million, 5 million level knocking around this year. And there are every year, but I think this year in particular, because I think this is a really weird year for free agency. Obviously with COVID hitting the salary cap, I think that's causing half of the league lots of problems, and then the other half of the league has got lots of cap space. So this is kind of almost a split this year. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're going to end up with lots of guys of the kind of 4 or 5 million a year, 1 year deal type free agents, almost a kind of prove it year type thing for those guys. And I think that McKinley fits right into that slot. He's fast, and I'm not sure. I guess he fits as a 4-3 end, which fits the Browns. I'm not sure that he's probably not better suited to a 3-4 outside linebacker, to be honest. But I think as a specialist pass rusher, I think he hits home. So I think put him up, on third down. I think he can start. I think he could be the end opposite Myles Garrett. But I still think that they're probably going to want to look for another guy at that position if they can get one, whether that's in free agency or in the draft.
Yeah, I think that's how most Browns fans feel, is that they're still looking to add to that position group, because there's really a lot of question marks after Myles, and even if you consider Takk McKinley to be the starter, behind those guys, there's not much proven talent at all on the roster, and it's tough to expect to make much of a run, with just two guys like that.
It is, and although we say this about lots of positions, it really is true at the edge position. You can never have enough of those guys. Those guys that can get to the passer and kill the passing game, you just can't have enough of those guys. So,
yeah,
that's right. That's what's kind of great about the Johnson signing, though, is that there are a lot of question marks, but with him, you know what you're getting.
Yep, absolutely.
McKinley's another question mark, but with Johnson, you know what you're getting every play, and we need more of those.
Yeah, so my computer's kind of freezing up on me here. I was going to look at some of the other guys that are available, and unfortunately I've got a bunch of screens open and nothing's moving. So what I do have open, which I was unaware of, is the fact that a lot of people had talked about the Browns, and corner, and everybody liked Mike Hilton, to come in as a third corner for the Browns from the Steelers, and the Bengals signed him apparently to a 4-year deal worth $24 million. And the Bengals are spending some money. You would think that they were really trying to make a run with what they're doing. Obviously they replaced one end with another, but they've spent some money. It's kind of a little bit surprising. So let's go back to Do you guys, either of you, expect the Browns to be serious about signing another edge guy in free agency? Do you think there's somebody out there in the appropriate salary range that they would bring in either to compete with Takk McKinley or be, that one of the, first or second guy in off the bench maybe? Or do you think that they look to the draft to fill out that room? What do you think, Jeff?
Well, I think it's going to have to be the draft at this point. Missing out on those top tier guys and just based on how the market went for all those edges. I mean, we were talking those guys being in the $10 million plus range. Well, they're all in the $15 million plus range. And kudos to Andrew Berry for not playing in that sandbox. But I think with the Takk McKinley signing, it signaled to me that they're going to look at edge with one of their first few picks in the draft. It's too bad that it's not, a top-heavy draft for edge, but there seems like there's a number of players later, like in the second and third round, that are worth looking at for that role. And, maybe McKinley is kind of a one-year bridge to developing somebody out of college.
Yeah, do you agree with that, Peter? Or you think there's somebody still out there who could help the Browns?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I mean, the name that's still out there, I believe he hasn't signed anywhere yet, is the guy at the Cardinals, who in essence,
Hassan
Reddick.
Hassan Reddick, yeah. There's a couple other guys, but they're older, I think. I'm not sure if anything's happened. I mean, Melvin Ingram's coming off an injury, I think.
I think somebody will pick up Ingram. And he may be one of those guys that sits there and ends up signing a $3 or $4 million deal towards the end of free agency. So again, I think if you hit the end of free agency and you haven't got a second guy, or you haven't drafted one, then Ingram would be an ideal guy to bring in on a kind of stopgap again. But Reddick's the guy that interests me because he really had a breakout year in 2020. And
he's the top guy left, no doubt.
But as Jeff said, most of those top guys are in the what looks like the $15 million a year range, and then it's all about value, isn't it? It's I don't mind spending $15 million a year on a guy if I get $15 million a year's worth of value. But that's a lot of money to go wrong on a player if you do go wrong. Whereas 3 or 4 million in this day and age isn't.
Do you think it's possible, Peter, to get that kind of value out of two guys on a line? I mean, when you've already got Myles Garrett, playing in that atmosphere, can you get another guy to give you that kind of contribution?
I think absolutely yes. When you've got a Myles Garrett, you would expect the guy rushing from the other end to pick up a whole bunch of sacks, tackles for losses just because Garrett's there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've got two other names for you, Peter. Tell me what you think about either one of these guys, because as far as I can tell, neither one of them signed yet, and that's Aldon Smith from the Cowboys. These are both older guys, and Ryan Kerrigan, 31 and 32 years old. But I mean, the Browns are looking for somebody for 1 year, and I don't think either one of these guys did a whole lot last season. But you're looking for somebody to come in and maybe not play every down anyways. Or even be out there all the time, right? Split time with Takk McKinley or be in a rotation. So what are your thoughts on either of those two guys?
Smith's an interesting guy because, he's spent a number of years out of the league with, whole bunches of personal problems. So although he is a little bit older, he doesn't have the old body in terms of, NFL injuries and that kind of thing. He's a guy that I think if you were looking to sign, you're looking to sign him on a 1 year, $4 or $5 million deal again. So going back to Jeff's point, I think him with McKinley, you've probably got two halves of a whole there, if you like, and a rotation there. So I wouldn't have a problem spending $4 or $5 million on Aldon Smith on a 1 year deal. I think he was solid in 2020. I don't know the number of sacks he had, but I would imagine it's half a dozen, that kind of number.
I think so.
And I think if you can kind of add that to Myles Garrett and then add McKinley adding in a few sacks here and there, then I think it's job done. And I think Ryan Kerrigan's probably in the same level of conversation. Probably half a dozen or so sacks last year. Similar type of conversation. I think he's a guy that's got lots of sacks over his career. But again, he's an older guy, and I guess his job's done at Washington with that line that they've got there with Chase Young and Montez Sweat and
pretty good line.
Yeah, it's pretty good. But yeah, no. I think Kerrigan can do a job for 1 or 2 years, and I think in this market this year, again, I'd be looking to get that type of guy on a 1 year, similar type deal to what McKinley was. So I think if you can get one of those two, plus McKinley, then I think it's job done, and you can start looking elsewhere in the draft.
Yeah. And thoughts on that, Jeff?
Yeah, no, I mean, Peter's right. If one of those guys will come in on a team-friendly deal, we need the help this year and next. I like developing guys for the future, but right now we're in a win now mode. So, if we can get a guy that can play at that level on something team-friendly, for sure, do it.
And I think Jeff raises a really important point there, which sometimes gets missed, particularly when we talk about the draft. Is it's very difficult for a younger guy, particularly a rookie, to come in and start and contribute straight away. They'll contribute straight away, but they're not going to be at their full level, their full, meet their full potential straight away. And so when you're a team that I think is a team that's in contention, a team that's very close to a championship game or even a Super Bowl, then you're looking to get guys that can come in and start as soon as possible, straight away. In other words,
exactly.
And so that's something that you have to think about when you go through the draft process. Obviously, you want to draft for the future, but if you've got a big hole, don't necessarily think about that. You're going to draft the guy this year that's going to come in and contribute and start 16 games and play at a Pro Bowl level. You're looking at your draftees this year to be progressing and be starting next year and Pro Bowl by year 3, that kind of thing. So I think that's a really important point that Jeff raises there.
Well, I really appreciate that, Peter, because that concept is completely new to us in Cleveland. We're used to thinking about who are we going to draft this year and what's their contribution going to be.
It's
different. We have to change our perspective about the draft.
Well,
when you're drafting 26th, you're not getting a guy that's going to come in and dominate as a rookie. It's just not
even though they used to be expected to. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So real quick, guys. I know there's some good corners in the draft. The Browns have a lot of holes at corner. So between the two of you guys, who are some corners in free agency that you think are in the range that the Browns, might be looking to spend, which is, I think probably even less than that $4 to $5 million range. Guys that they can get in on a decent deal who can contribute and provide depth at corner. There's still quite a few cornerbacks out there, but they are not going to sign any of these top tier corners. I don't think. I think if they bring in a top tier corner, it's probably going to be through the draft, I would think. But I'm kind of working my way down and trying to trying to find, somebody who. I know Kevin King's come up, and Peter, you probably want him to stay in Green Bay. Troy Hill, yeah. I mean, then it drops down quite a ways. Richard Sherman, I don't know what kind of deal he's going to get. People have talked about him coming to Cleveland. There's a lot of guys out there. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a couple, 2 or 3 things there. I think that the likes of Richard Sherman. I think there's lots of teams that would be interested in Richard Sherman on a short-term deal. But you're talking in the 10 million range probably. So the same with Patrick Peterson.
Browns aren't going to do that.
Yeah, and I think that maybe a Xavier Rhodes type.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good player, good solid starting corner in Minnesota for a long time. Played at Indianapolis last year. He's a good player. Now, you're probably in the 7 million range a year for somebody like Xavier Rhodes, I would imagine, that kind of figure. But I think it's going to depend on what happens in the next few days, because as teams start to release guys to get under the cap, and more of these teams sign more of these bigger free agents and then have to start to release guys, eventually it's going to push the market price down of some of those guys that are still out there, because all of a sudden there's going to be whole bunches of corners, for example, in that 4, 5, 6, 7 million a year range, who will suddenly become 3, 4, and 5 million a year.
Right.
And Kevin King could be one of those guys, and Kevin King's a guy that really splits opinion in Green Bay and has done ever since he was drafted. Physical corner. His downside is he doesn't have great speed and is injured a lot. If he weren't injured a lot, well, he wouldn't have hit the free agent market, I'm sure. I think he's a good player. But again, he's a guy that's probably in that 5 million a year range, but he's young. Kevin King, what is he, 25 years old, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So that there's a guy that, if you're prepared to take a little bit of chance on his injury history, which is a shoulder injury which he's had since being in college, there's a guy that you could imagine signing on a 3-year, $15 million total contract, 5 million a year, that kind of thing. And that would be a good pickup, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know what you think, Jeff. I don't know. I think for the right guy, I could almost see the Browns signing a corner in that range. If they did, it'd be one guy, and then everybody else they brought in would be on, contracts under $2 million a season at that position. They've got some spots to fill, definitely.
You're putting a lot of weight on Greedy Williams coming back, unless you bring in somebody that can hold down that position.
Yeah, definitely. So
I guess in an ideal world, you'd like to pick up one of those kind of mid-range free agent corners, and then hopefully, a corner would fall to you either in the first or second round, somewhere reasonably high in the draft, that you could develop to be, the starter next year.
Right.
Yeah. And I think this is a good place to transition to the draft. And Peter has you have positional boards out that you put out on Twitter. Are you still on version 1, Peter, which is what I have in front of me?
I'm on version 1 of the published one, yeah.
Okay. You're working on version 2, I'm sure, because I know you're always working. So let's start with corners. I really don't want to go mock draft and all that stuff. Yeah. I really wanted to kind of look at where we think the Browns are going to go in this draft. And I think we've known since last May that, or actually, last April, that the Browns were going to be addressing defense in this draft.
Right.
And specifically corner, safety, maybe linebacker, and maybe edge, depending on what they do in free agency. But definitely defense. So I'm really intrigued with the corners in this draft, and I'll tell you why, because I start going down the list of the top guys, and I see 6'2", 6'2", 6'1", 6'1", 5'10", but then 6'3", 6'1", 6'2", 6'1", 6'1". It's There's some big corners in this draft, and to have talented big corners like that, especially with all the big frame receivers that have come out recently and are in the league, man, these guys could really help a team. Obviously depending on how they, if they play up to their billing. So I guess Peter, let's kind of go through. Because my way of thinking here is, even if the Browns sign somebody like Kevin King, there's a darn good chance they're taking a corner in either the first or the second round in this draft. I'll almost be surprised if they don't take a corner in round 1 or 2, because I don't know if they're taking another safety. And I think the other picks could be an edge, could be a linebacker, but I think there's a real good chance they take a corner. So tell us about your favorites, and then kind of guys that you think, if the Browns stay put, who could be there for them in the first and second round.
Yeah. So I think at corner you've got this kind of two solid groups, if you like. You've got a group of the top 3 corners, which are Caleb Farley, Patrick Surtain, and then slightly below those 2, J.C. Horn. And you would expect all 3 of those to have gone probably by the middle of the first round. Horn maybe around pick 20, but certainly I would expect those 3 to have gone by the time the Browns pick at 26.
Yeah, so they would have to move up to get one of those guys.
Yeah. I think it would be a fluke if one of those were to drop any further, and I think that would only happen if there was a sudden run on one of the other positions, like wide receiver, for example. But so I think at 26, where the Browns are picking, I think you're looking at this kind of second group of corners, which start with Greg Newsome of Northwestern, and I think the thing about Newsome is so he's just had his pro day at Northwestern. I think it was last week, and run an incredible 40 time, well under 4.4, which I think has surprised a lot of people. So he's a decent size, about 6'1", and like you say, lots of these corners in this draft are that kind of size, 6'1", 6'2". Asante Samuel is the kind of outlier for that, who we'll get to in a minute. But I think a guy around somewhere between 20 and 30, Greg Newsome is probably the guy that most teams in that area who are looking for a corner would probably be angling for. I mean he's a very aggressive corner, very physical. A little bit like, and you've probably not seen too much of him, but a little bit like Jair Alexander at the Packers right now. Very physical, very in your face, team leader type, the type of guy that you'd like at corner, to be honest. Not passive in any way. So yeah, I mean I like Newsome in that position a lot. Okay. I guess a couple of the other guys around that kind of area. There's 2 corners at Georgia, Eric Stokes and Tyson Campbell. and Campbell is kind of seems to be rising up people's draft boards right now. But I think for me it's Newsom if he's there. I think you take him. I think you grab him. And then some of these other guys, I guess it depends on if you're looking for. So guys like Aaron Robinson at Central Florida is a kind of a slot corner, which in this day and age is becoming more of an important position. And the name I just mentioned, Asante Samuel, I struggle with him because of his size. 5'10", and I'm not even sure he's 5'10". And he reminds, as a Packers fan, he reminds me of Terrell Buckley, who the Packers drafted many years ago out of Florida State, who was a very good ball player, but was just physically too small. And that's who Samuel reminds me of. I guess the other guy, if you got down to round 2, round 3, which would be an interesting one for the Browns, would be the guy out of Ohio State, Shaun Wade, who I have to say was better in 2019 than he was in the abbreviated 2020. But that's because in 2019 he played most of his time in the slot rather than covering on the outside. So again, if you're looking for a slot guy, Shaun Wade in round 2 or round 3 would be a good pick.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of these guys that are ranked high enough to go in the first couple rounds, maybe up to as many as 10 or 11, I guess, if there's really a run on corners.
Yeah, I could absolutely see 10 or 11 going in the first 2.5 rounds. Absolutely could see that.
Then it looks like there's a little bit of a drop off after that. It seems. I'm really intrigued by the Browns getting, a cornerback that's over 6 foot tall who can play. They don't have a lot of guys on the team over 6 foot, at the wide receiver or corner position. So be kind of nice to bring somebody in like that. So
matches up size wise, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're fortunate that we have a number one guy back there that can take the other team's number one out of the game. But after that, there's a pretty big drop off.
Yeah, there has been.
What's just as an aside, what's amazing to me, there's a guy out of South Carolina, Israel Makwamu. He is 6'4" and a bit. It's huge, absolutely huge for a corner. Now he's a guy that you'd be looking at a little bit further down the draft in the middle rounds. But if you're looking for a big guy, he's it. He's huge. I mean, he's a guy that you think probably ought to be playing strong safety, and probably with a bit more weight, probably ought to be playing outside linebacker. He's a big guy.
So the Browns have addressed safety, but if the Browns were looking for a true free safety in the draft, some guy to come in and play center field, especially if they have issues, first guy off the bench, who would they be looking at in the draft? And probably not a guy that would take real high, I wouldn't think, in the draft. But who do you think the best prospects are at free safety?
So there's a couple of guys that. So a guy that's getting a lot of kind of press and seems to be moving up the draft boards right now is Richie Grant, Central Florida. He's just under 6 foot. So if you like, probably slightly undersized for a typical safety, but is a good deep safety. Again, he's another guy that's kind of aggressive and physical and will get up and play the run. He loves to hit. There's a career that's got a guy that's got I think it's 10 or 11 interceptions in his college career. So he makes plays and he's a guy that's around the ball a lot. So forces fumbles, recovers fumbles. One of those guys that, if the ball's on the ground, it always seems to be him that's either caused it or recovered it. So Richie Grant, I think, is a good guy if you can get him probably in about round 2. The other guy is the guy at Syracuse, Andre Cisco. So a very typical, what we would have called in the old days, ball hawking type of free safety type of guy. Lots of interceptions. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but lots of interceptions across his college career. Gets sideline to sideline, but just seems one of those free safeties that always just seems to find the ball in the air, and pick off passes. Now the only issue with him is that he suffered an ACL injury in 2020, early in the year. Else he'd probably be a first round pick. So he's one of those guys that you might be able to get in round 2, round 3, maybe drop to round 3, that you could throw a dart at, and if he's back to where he was, you're getting a bargain.
Yeah. Peter, I just looked him up. In 2018, he had 7 interceptions. In 2019, he had 5.
Yeah.
In only 9 games.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely one of those guys. When you go back and look at Syracuse from those years, it seemed like he was making plays all the time. Now, obviously, what's that? 12 interceptions just given us over 2 years, and he's just one of those guys that just seems to come up with those plays.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting, just to see what the Browns are thinking. When I think of Andrew Berry and just what he's done in the draft, what he did last season for the Browns, I think he goes after the best guy. So, and he'll move up a spot or back a couple spots, and he will. If one of these guys is there, even if he's got 3 safeties on the roster, but he can get a guy who he thinks is going to contribute or going to be, a great player, in a year, I think I'll take him. So, so I could definitely see him going after, one of those 2 guys in this spot.
I think the other name that's worth throwing out there, and this partly comes into the linebacker discussion, is the guy from Notre Dame. I'm going to try and pronounce his name, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. So I don't know if you guys remember the guy that, gosh, his name slipped my mind now, that Isaiah Simmons that Arizona picked last year.
Yeah.
It's kind of a hybrid linebacker safety guy.
Yeah.
Well, this guy from Notre Dame is a very similar type player.
Safety linebacker or whatever.
Safety linebacker. So he's the kind of guy probably in the 4-3 that you'd probably have as a weak side outside linebacker, because he's not very big. So he's 6'1", 215-ish, if you can believe that. There are rumors that he's actually even smaller than that. So it might be that he best fits safety in the NFL. The reason he's kind of liked at linebacker, he does it all. So he can rush the passer, excellent blitzer, covers tight ends, covers backs out of the backfield, and makes plays. So he makes sacks, has interceptions, breaks up passes. He's quite a dominant player at that. For Notre Dame over a couple of years, and plays big in the big games. So Notre Dame beat Clemson earlier this year, or the season just gone, and he had a huge game in that game. So that's definitely a guy that you would expect to go again somewhere between picks 20 and 30. And if he were there, he would certainly be an interesting. Somebody will take him in that range. I'm sure they will.
Yeah, that would definitely be interesting, because I mean, I think John Johnson is so versatile too. A lot of people have talked about him, almost being linebacker-ish himself. I think we give the Browns a lot of flexibility if they could, if they went that direction. I just go ahead, Peter.
No, I was going to say, and especially in this day and age with the predominance of the passing game, Owusu Karamo is a guy that you'd never need to take him off the field. So you'd leave him in there in nickel and dime situations.
Right.
So it's very interesting. My only reticence is that sometimes you find these guys that are kind of between positions somehow never find a position. That teams end up never quite knowing what his best position is and never finding it for him.
Yeah, and they kind of float around out there and never get good at anything. Yeah.
I know that feeling only too well, Rod.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So, the Browns and the linebacker position, it's kind of like a big secret. Okay, we really don't know. We just have ideas of what the Browns think about the linebacker position. They waited until the fourth or the fifth round they took Jacob Phillips last year, Jeff. I think it was
fourth. I think
fourth round they
sure.
took, and everybody expected them to take, a linebacker higher, and they just, took other players and kept waiting. So, so people, talk linebacker. We really don't know. So if the Browns are interested in a linebacker, what direction might they go? Aside from the gentleman you just talked about.
Yeah.
Nice dodge on the pronunciation.
Yeah.
I might have been able to get it, but yeah.
It probably sounds even worse in UK English, but so yeah, I guess the really interesting guy at linebacker, and again, he's another guy likely to go in that kind of 20 to 30 range, is Zavon Collins of Tulsa.
Yeah.
And the reason he's so he's fast, he's physical, but I guess the thing that really excites and intrigues is the guy's 6'4", 260.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he's one of those guys that can play the run, can play in coverage, can rush the passer, does it all. He's just huge for a linebacker. You don't see linebackers, particularly inside linebackers or middle linebackers, that size. He looks a bit like Brian Urlacher that used to play for the Bears. Looks a bit like that guy. Now, obviously, if you could get a guy that played like Brian Urlacher, then you'd be jumping at taking that guy. But he's the guy that's just hugely intriguing, and certainly will be, again, a guy that's probably around in that 20 to 30 area in terms of a pick, and absolutely worth that value if he was there at 26.
I see him mocked to the Browns a lot, Peter.
Right. Okay.
The way things have gone in the past, that means there's probably about zero chances that he'll actually end up here.
Well, it means there's probably 10 teams waiting to trade up to 20 and snag him.
Right. But I like the thought process.
Yeah. It depends what the Browns want. This draft, and we've already talked about the depth at corner. I don't know if the Browns are going to draft it at interior D line or not. It'd probably be later in the draft, I think, if they go that route. This draft is loaded with wide receivers again. Second season in a row. I mean, how many wide receivers do you expect to go in the first round, Peter? Just roughly
5
in the first round. Yeah,
quite that kind of number. And as you said, it's probably at least as good a wide receiver class as last year's, maybe better. And that's saying a lot, given how good last year certainly was on paper going into the draft, at least.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and a lot of good offensive linemen too. How many? And probably 4 quarterbacks going in the first round.
4
Probably
or 5.
in the top 10.
Yeah, I
4
think
or 5, and
yeah,
then a couple, maybe 2 running backs going in the first round.
Harris and ETN. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, you start adding the numbers up, and you wonder about the breakdown. So, there's a shot that Zavon Collins could be there for the Browns.
Yeah, and that's exactly the thing. If 5 quarterbacks go before then, and I expect 5 will go. There's 4 in the top 10 plus Mac Jones. I think 5 will go. 3 or 4 wide receivers could easily go by pick 20. Or 3 definitely will. 4 quite possibly. And all of a sudden that's 9. Just on those two positions. Like you say, throw in a couple of running backs, throw in a couple of edge guys, 2 or 3 edge guys, and all of a sudden that's 14 or 15 picks, and we haven't even talked about the other positions yet. I mean,
touch offensive line. There's going to be several of those guys go.
5
at least
5.
2. Yeah. So, I think the Browns have a shot, especially when you talk about Zavon Collins or Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
Thank you. I wanted to hear Peter say it at least 3 times. So, I guess, Peter, just based on the information we have right now as far as what the Browns have done, just give me, I think we probably did this last year, just give me what you think would be just a tremendous draft for the Browns, just through maybe the first 3 rounds. And the Browns, I don't have the numbers of their picks right in front of me, but they have a first, a second, and then 2 picks in the third.
26, 59, and then 89 and 91, Rod.
Okay.
Yeah. So now you're putting me on the spot. So I think that. So I think I think in the first round it's one of those 3 guys. It's either Newsome, it's Owusu-Koramoah, or it's Zavon Collins. So we're going to assume one of those 3 will drop to them at 26. And then I guess you go from what position did we not pick in the first round to who we might get in round 2. Let me think about that. So picking what 50, right? So right near the end of round 2.
59, yeah. You said 59, right?
Yeah.
So I think it will depend if they didn't get if they don't get Newsome, for example, in round 1. So say they took one of the other positions in round 1. So say Collins drops to them in round 1, and then they come back for a corner say in round 2. Then somebody like Eric Stokes out of Georgia is likely to be there around between 50 and 60. So I think that would be a good pick. So we've assumed we've gone Zavon Collins in round 1, Eric Stokes of Georgia in round 2. Round 3. I guess what other positions are they really then looking for if they've covered off corner and linebacker?
Edge.
I would say edge. Maybe safety. They may be looking for either a big or either a big frame or a speedster wide out. Maybe round 3 or 4.
Right. So the edge guy that I think will go in round 3 is Quincy Roach of Miami. So Miami's got three edge guys. Rousseau, Jalen Phillips, who will both go in round 1. But Quincy Roach doesn't stand up against the run particularly well, but is a huge pass rusher, really quick off the edge. So I think in round 3, if Roach is there, I think you've then got Collins in round 1, Stokes in round 2, Roach in round 3. That sounds like a really good draft to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then they got another pick. What? 4 picks later, Jeff?
Yeah. Well, 2 picks later, they're at 91, and then they got another one at 110.
Yeah.
So the 3 really bunched tight at the end of the 3rd round.
Right.
Beginning of the 4th.
Yeah. So I guess at this point, Peter, if they were going to go wide receiver, into the 3rd round, and to my way of thinking, they either want a big guy with great hands, and decent speed, or they want some guy just a flat out burner. One of the two. And I know this draft has both.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the guys. Are the Browns allowed to draft a guy from Michigan?
You did last year.
Yeah, it has to be at the very end of the draft.
That'd be 7th.
That's a rule.
So the wide receiver that kind of fits, just as you've described, Rod, kind of end of round 3-ish, is over 6'4", 215, 220, that kind of number, is Nico Collins out of Michigan. And he's exactly that. He's a big, physical receiver, good in the red zone, decent production in college without having the top numbers. And if he had the top numbers, he wouldn't be there in the 3rd round anyway. But that's the guy at the end of the 3rd round. If he's there, Nico Collins would be the wide receiver pick for me, because he fits exactly that mold that you've just described, and you'll forgive him coming from Michigan, I'm sure.
And right after his name's called in the draft, all is forgiven. Yeah. And don't you agree, Jeff? I mean, that's kind of what the Browns haven't had in a while. They've brought in speed guys, before. They really haven't had the big wide receiver, that some other teams have had. So I think, I think a guy like that would really be given a shot. And, especially with Stefanski liking the tight ends. And I know the Browns play a lot of 2-3 tight ends, so maybe a big wide receiver isn't really necessary. But, if he's got more speed than the tight ends, then I think the Browns would have a spot for him.
Yeah, I think there's a few things at play there. Number one, we know that we have 2 very expensive wide receivers already who we're going to have to do something with one of them probably in the next 3 years. So we need to be developing somebody to step in. And I think we've had several people on the podcast talk about the need to take the top off the opponent's defense. So some speed and athleticism combination at the wide receiver spot that we can be developing over the next couple of years. Certainly a need for the Browns from a developmental standpoint. Where that happens in the draft, I mean, we've got Peoples-Jones that's sort of in that path right now. We had Josh Gordon a number of years ago. Terrell Pryor had some success for a season in that role. I still think there's a fit for that kind of player, regardless of how we structure our offense. But this is probably a great draft to be looking, like to Peter's point, how deep we are at wide receiver this year. It's a great time to be looking for that kind of guy.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that it's always difficult when a draft is deep at a position like it is at wide receiver, because you think, well, I get to the 5th or 6th round and I can take a guy there, and you certainly can. But you have to be thinking in the 5th and 6th round, is a wide receiver you take in round 6 any better than what you've probably already got on the roster? And probably the answer's no, probably. So
Right.
so and I think that applies to lots of teams. So I think some of those later rounds are ideal for just almost throwing a dart at a guy and taking a chance on somebody. But for me, if you're looking for that big, so Nico Collins reminds me of Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who plays for the Packers. And you talk about taking the top off the defense. That's exactly what MVS does. It's the one speed guy that the Packers have got, and that's who Collins reminds me of.
Gotcha. Nice. So Jeff, this is for you. I've been talking to Peter a lot. The Browns have 9 picks in this draft, and we've talked about this, even before I think last season's draft. The Browns aren't bringing in 9 rookies. Okay, 9 rookies aren't making this team. So, are the Browns more likely to? I'll give you 3 options. Are they more likely to consolidate and move up and wind up drafting 5-6 guys? Are they more likely to take the guys they want and move some picks out, trade out, moving picks out to next season? Or are they more likely to use the picks and bring guys in and have a look at them and just cut some guys they draft?
I would say the first scenario is probably the most likely, but I think there are some elements of the second scenario as well. Just with this draft not being particularly strong at the positions that we have a need at near the top. For instance, most places I look, there's no edge ranked in the top 20. There's only a couple of linebackers and cornerbacks ranked in the top 20. There's no safeties ranked in the top 20. I mean, all those areas that we really have the need at, this draft is thicker in the middle rounds. So, I almost wonder if the Browns don't take that 26 pick and really go get a particular guy that they want with it somehow, either moving slightly up or down. And then the rest of the draft, you're probably going to see them taking guys in that 70 to 90 range for depth on this roster and for development for future years. You're totally right. There's no way on earth that anybody past the 3rd round is contributing to the Browns in the next year or two. So why use those picks on guys that aren't going to make the team? I think there's more value in leveraging those picks into higher rounds, even if it's, 1 or 2 guys that they can plug in as depth pieces. One place that we haven't mentioned yet, offensive tackle. We've got 2 really solid starters, but Kendall Lamb just left in free agency. Chris Hubbard had an injury late in the season. We just don't have a number 3 offensive tackle right now. That may be somebody that, gets picked up toward the end of free agency. But I think that's a position that it would be great to find a guy in, late round 2 through round 3 that we could be developing, for when Jack Conklin's contract is up. So those kinds of decisions are going to be interesting to watch, this year.
Yeah, you're right. Peter?
So a good a tackle in round 2, towards the end of round 2 somewhere. So there's a guy at North Dakota State, which is where Trey Lance plays. Dylan Reduns is a really good, probably right tackle in the pros. Probably will go in the 2nd or 3rd round. Is a guy, because of the level that he's played at, probably needs a bit of time to come in. But with the tackles you've got, you're not looking for a guy to come in and start immediately. As long as there's no injury. So he could be the guy.
Yeah. So Peter, you know what? Just kind of glossed right over edge. What if the Browns cross everybody up and either pick a guy at edge or move up a few spots, at 26, or move up a few spots, somewhere in the 20 to 26 range, and take the top edge guy available. Who do you think that would be?
Yeah, and that's a good point, because Jeff just raised that absolutely rightly. In probably the first 15-ish picks, there isn't really an edge that's likely to go in the top 15. But then you've got three guys that you could see going between 15 and 30, might go between 15 and 25. Rousseau of Miami, just a huge guy, 6'7", big guy, longest arms you've ever seen. I think he had 15 and a half sacks a year ago, but has only played 1 year in college, so he opted out of this year. He's a young guy, so he's one of those guys that's flashed it once, and do you pick on that potential? I think somebody will. There's another Michigan guy, Quincy Roach, so edge rusher, probably going to go between 15 and 20, maybe pick 20. And then the other guy from Miami, Jalen Phillips. So as I said earlier, there's 3 Miami guys, with Quincy Roach probably going in the 3rd round. But Jalen Phillips is probably the 3rd of those 3 in the 1st round. And I would expect him to possibly be there at 26, but he might go slightly earlier than that, because I think once the first one gets picked, then probably the other 2 get picked quite quickly after that. And Phillips, on paper, is probably the best player of all of those 3. His issue is that he's had a whole bunch of injuries, including a number of concussions in college, to the point at one point where he even retired from playing, and then came back and transferred to Miami. I think he was at UCLA or somewhere, and then transferred to Miami after sitting out a year. If his head's in it, and if he's fit, he's probably the best edge player on the board, but he kind of drops down this board because of those concerns. So yeah, I think picking up on Jeff's point about using those draft picks, the later draft picks, to try and move up, I think that's a strong possibility. I think if you get to kind of pick 14 and 15, say, and those 3 guys are still on the board, or 2 of those guys are on the board, I could definitely picture teams in the 20s moving up to take one of those guys. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Makes the draft a little more interesting for us, not knowing. We're not used to picking so late in the 1st round in Cleveland.
Well, I kept looking at the draft order, Rod, and I started at pick 1, and I didn't see Cleveland on there, and I thought I must have got the wrong list.
At 26, what's this? The list from the 1950s or what?
I think what makes it quite interesting, though, I think when you've had the level of success that the Browns have had over the last couple of years, and last year they were just inches away. You get to the position where if you can cover the 1 or 2 holes that you've got in free agency, so you've done that with the safety position, if perhaps you can do it with the corner position, you then get into this, what's quite a nice position in the draft, where you can almost pick any position. You're not going to pick quarterback, and you're not going to pick running back, but right. Other than that, you can almost pick any position, and it will be a good position to pick at, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Yeah. Whoever's the best player on the board at that time, would almost fit nicely.
And I think Andrew Berry has a predisposition to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I really think he does. And obviously they're looking defensive side of the ball, so they're not going to, the chance of the Browns taking a wide receiver in the 1st round is, not very great. But yeah, I could see him taking an edge, a linebacker, a corner, I don't think, it's probably not a safety, but I could see him taking any of those spots. So It's very interesting. It's good to not know that the Browns have a need that they have to fill. And man, if these two guys are gone, we are in trouble. So, Peter, it's been great talking to you. We've been going for a while, and I know it's pretty late across the pond. So,
well, thank you for having me on. So our clocks didn't go forward this past weekend. So there's only 4 hours between you guys and us right now.
Well, you're probably just ready for dinner then, or so.
It feels that way. But no, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's great to talk some football. It's great to talk some draft stuff. It's I always get excited this time of the year. When you look at all of these potential draftees, knowing that you look at all of these, and 99% of them never come to your team anyway. But it's still exciting. Still exciting to hope and think and
definitely. So everybody can follow you. You've got the two different handles. Where are you putting your draft content out under your main handle?
Yes.
So that's at _IT_hedgehog.
Yeah. That's the best one.
Okay, excellent. Any closing remarks? Anything you'd like to leave everybody with?
Nothing other than, I think, as we touched on earlier, this has been a particularly difficult year for those of us who are kind of very amateur draft, whatever you want to call us, prognosticators, guessers, whatever, because of all of these players opting out this year. But that makes it doubly hard for the teams this year. It's going to be really difficult for them trying to make a judgment on players who haven't played for a year and one have played for 18 months by the time the draft comes round. Players that they won't be able to necessarily run all of those guys through the full process that they'd like to run them through. So I think it's quite difficult for teams this year.
Yeah, definitely. Anything in closing, Jeff?
We've got a long time before we're really into the draft. It's end of April, and there's a lot that's going to happen between now and then. But I just want to sort of go back to the things we've said in the past about how a roster gets built through the draft. And, where the Browns are right now, if you look at our offensive line, Jedrick Wills is the only guy on really a team-friendly contract, if you sort of break down how much these guys are getting paid over the next few years, which really makes the point to why it's so important to hit on those mid-round picks that you can fill the roster out with that are going to be on team-friendly deals. Is we have to start paying some of our big guys big money over the next few years. So I'm looking forward to how Andrew Berry does that and maximizes the value for these draft picks. Peter, it's always a pleasure talking to you, by the way.
Well, thank you, Jeff. You too. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, guys. It's been a lot of fun, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch over the next, the remainder of free agency and the draft, which is coming up. So this has been the Browns Blitz. We will catch you next time.